Good evening, and thank you for tuning in tonight to the Lessons of Vietnam show, the show that tries to tell the real story of the Vietnam War and the men and women who participated in it. A lot of myths and misunderstandings out there about the war. We try to tell the real story. And if you're out there and you hear me say something that you don't think is right, let me know because I'd like to make sure that uh, I do tell the real truth out there as much as possible. Uh, I know that sometimes you can do research, you can prove just about any point you got as far as what's real and what's not real out there, especially on the internet. But my name is Bill Dixon. I'm a Vietnam veteran from 1967-68. I'm a Tet survivor, and we do our show from the international headquarters of Nissan Communications. And if you like this show, or whether you don't like this show, maybe you ought to tune in some of Amnon's other shows here at Nissan Communication. He does several different shows, and some of them are kind of strange, but uh, I guess some people would say the Lessons of Vietnam show was strange too. So be sure to tune in to some of the others. Again, I invite you to participate in any way you would like. You can see there on the screen the 919-518-9773, or go into Skype. Computer is 2K Voice, and comment. Tell me whether you like the show. Tell me you don't like the show. Tell me something or ask me a question about what we're talking about and so forth. Whatever, just participate. Now, we are always try to remember the Veterans Crisis Line, 1-800-273-8255, press 1. So if you are a veteran or you know a veteran who is in crisis, please be sure and pick up the phone and reach out, and because there's help out there and so forth. Okay. Now, what we're going to be doing tonight is talking about Operation Ranch Hand. It's not that kind of ranch hand that you see there in the picture, where a cowboy is out there running around with cows and horses and so forth. This ranch hand was the code word for a operation that lasted a long time in Vietnam. It started early in the 60s and went up into the 70s. And Operation Ranch Hand was basically, as you can see there in the picture, also on 12th of January 1962, Operation Ranch Hand began with mixed results. And you can see there a fleet of 4 airplanes flying over, and they're not spraying, well, they are spraying the crops. What they're doing there is they're spraying the foliage. Operation Ranch Hand 1962 to 1971. And they had 6 basic flavors. They had Agent White, Agent Pink, Agent Purple, Agent Blue, Agent Green, and what everybody knows is Agent Orange. So when you hear people quite often talking about Agent Orange, that is a conglomeration of all the others, 5 flavors. So as we move out, we're going to be talking about Agent Orange, but we're talking about all of them. The term Operation Ranch Hand was a military code name for spraying herbicides from U.S. Air Force aircraft in Southeast Asia from 1963 through 1971. Ranch hand aircraft were Fairchild C-123s, as you see there in the picture, medium transports with 2-piston engines, which later had 2 jet engines added for extra thrust. The ranch hand detachment began with 6 airplanes, and they actually flew those from the United States, making stops and for along the way. And they actually started with more planes than that, but some of them didn't make it. They dropped down to 2 airplanes and peaked at 25 airplanes by 1969. Now, I have a note there. The Army also used a flying banana originally, the helicopter that looked like a banana that we talked about the last show. And they also sprayed, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner there, they sprayed the defoliants by hand. They actually filled up those pump things that like you use in your garden and used those to spray also. So between 1962 and 1971, ranch hands sprayed about 19 million gallons of herbicide. 11 million gallons of this total was Agent Orange. The spray fell mostly on the forests of South Vietnam, but some was used in Laos and some killed crops to deprive Viet Cong and North Vietnamese troops of food. Now, that would be Agent Blue they used for that. But you can see what happens if you go in and spray. It turns it into dead plants, as you can see there in the kids. The military purpose for using herbicides on non-cropland was to remove the vegetation cover used by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces for concealment. The Viet Cong and the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army, had time enough to, back from the French, were there to build bunkers, and the weeds had grown up all over them. So sometimes you could walk up on a heavy fortified concrete bunker or out of sandbags or whatever, and you couldn't see them because of the vegetation and so forth, because in the jungle conditions over there, it grew fast. And as you can see there, one of also the reasons that they sprayed along the river, especially, and the deep foliage along the river there, and you can see a lot of the rivers there were very narrow. And as the brown water navy, as we called it, went up and down the rivers, they were getting shot up pretty bad from some of those bunkers. Even though they were shooting back, the bullets were just hitting the concrete and ricocheting off. So Admiral Zumwalt actually ordered the spraying of Agent Orange along the riverbanks to clear the vegetation so they could see these bunkers a whole lot more. October 1955, Wind and Dim. Now, you know, my Southern boys kill some of these names and so forth, but I do the best I can. You can figure it out yourself. Established the First Republic of Vietnam, the Republic of Vietnam, with himself as president. He was a leader of the Catholic element and was opposed by many Buddhists. And you may go back and think about the interesting part that John F. Kennedy was our first Catholic president at the time. I don't know whether that's a coincidence or just how what happened. As a result of South Vietnamese President Diem calling for the U.S. to spray the crops, deny the food to the communists, the United States government got interested in it, and presidential advisor Walt Rostow, who was a big advocate of increased U.S. intervention in Southeast Asia, became interested in using herbicides. In other words, he wanted us to really get involved in the war, and he got interested in herbicides because the South Vietnamese president wanted some, because he wanted to have it sprayed to basically get away with, kill the rice, so that the communists, either the Viet Cong, which are the guerrillas, or the NVA, regular soldiers, would have a hard time getting food as they came down, because Army travels on its stomach. From the beginning, senior U.S. officials were totally aware of the political fallout and the near certainty that American use of herbicides will become a propaganda windfall for the communists, with the United States using biological and chemical warfare. A lot of propaganda out there. There was a lot of propaganda, but it didn't make much difference. They continued spraying. As they went along, it got more and more. Spraying Agent Orange, the United States used herbicides in the Vietnam War. U.S. airplanes and helicopters sprayed herbicides. For those of you who do not know, the compound Agent Orange, blue, white, and pink are a defoliant, as we can see there in the pictures. When it sprayed over the lush jungles, the air affected would become devoid of vegetation. Now, we were told as we got sprayed, don't worry about it, it won't hurt you. It kills the plants, but it doesn't affect the humans at all. So, Agent Orange causes cancer and plethora of other side effects. The use of defoliants in Vietnam saved many American and South Vietnamese lives during the Vietnam War. But the price has been higher from both in Vietnam and Americans who fought in the war. Because I don't think the United States government necessarily realized what it did to the people that got sprayed. It affected the water, it affected the plants, it's still affecting in the ground and so forth. It would be hard to say that the ratio of those saved outnumbered the numbers who have died as a result of exposure to Agent Orange since the end of the war. There's a lot of diseases out there, and it's continuing on. So it's kind of up in the air if it was good or if it was bad. If you survived Vietnam and you came home, it was probably good. But if you survived Vietnam and came home and now you're dying from one of the cancers, it may not have been bad. Good at all. It's kind of up to the individual, I guess, which way they go. Like I said, the defoliant agents are still today a cause of deformity as well as a killer of men, women, and children in both Vietnam and America. So not only is Vietnam today having a lot of problems with the residuals of the defoliants, So are the men and women who are Americans who were over there fighting. They're also having a lot of problems, which we'll go into as we go on with the show. It is believed to be negatively affecting the health of children and grandchildren, as well as changing their DNA along with the men and women who served even now. Now, let me go back to that just a bit. Not only is it affecting the soldiers who fought in Vietnam, it's affecting our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. As you can see there, some of the stickers you see on some of the cars, we came home and death came home with us. In other words, we brought the residuals of Agent Orange with us when we came back home. Concerns about the health effects of exposure to Agent Orange were initially voiced in 1970, following a study that reported the incidence of birth defects in laboratory mice given high doses of herbicide 2,4,5-T, TCD, a dioxin contaminated of 2,4,5-T was isolated as the actual cause of the birth defects. That was a chemical makeup of the Agent Oranges. They were originally made to be watered down or diluted, but unfortunately, most of the barrels who were taken over were used right out of the barrel, never diluted. So whether it had been properly diluted, I'm not certain if they would have the after effects now, because I'm not a chemist, but also I don't know whether it would kill the foliage and so forth. But okay. That's some of the effects of Agent Orange. You can see on the bottom right, left-hand corner, the reason it was called Agent Orange, because the barrels had an orange stripe on it. Agent Blue had a blue stripe on it. Agent Pink had a pink stripe, and you can see them spraying there. That's a young man they think is in Vietnam who think is have been exposed to the residuals of Agent Orange. And you can see the child there with deformity that has also had problems from residuals. Herbicides that clear jungles in Vietnam causes cancer and birth defects. Now, these pictures are all from Vietnam. Okay. A commission established in 1970 to study the effects of herbicides on the ecology and population of South Vietnam reported that herbicides had not only destroyed vegetation and food, but 2,4,5-T and its associated dioxins contaminated might possibly have caused birth defects along the South Vietnamese people who were exposed to it. And you see there two young people that have birth defects who are accommodated to Agent Orange exposure because it stays in the ground. On April 15th, 1970, all use of 2,4,5-T in the United States was suspended, except for killing of weeds and brush on non-cropland. How are you coming out there, folks, with your Roundup that you're spraying on your weeds and so forth? You got your own Operation Ranch Hand going if you aren't careful. On May 9th, 1970, Operation Ranch Hand flew its last mission in Vietnam, and U.S. forces stopped ground spraying in 1971. Now, they stopped ground spraying in 1971 from airplanes, but they didn't necessarily stop the hand spraying. The herbicide was banned completely in 1985 by the Environmental Protection Agency. Okay, as you can see, the young man there holding his hand up, stop and don't, and so forth. So the damage to the plant life of South Vietnam caused by the spraying of Agent Orange is still visible today. You can see it in the people. You can see it in the landscape quite often over there now. The most severe damage occurred in the mangrove forest or tropical trees and shrubs of coastal areas where spraying left barren, badly eroded coastlines. A lot of the money crops in Vietnam have still not recovered from the use of defoliants and so forth. You see very few birds over in Vietnam today. In fact, the last time we were there, we kind of asked our guide, where are all the birds? Where are the seagulls? And so forth. And he just kind of brushed it off, but it affected the eggs. And if you see the deer there, it's got 4 hind legs. The number of coastal birds declined dramatically, and with the disappearance of the web of water channels beneath the mangrove trees, fish were deprived of important breeding grounds. It is estimated that full recovery of mangrove forests to their former state will take at least 100 years. Y'all can find out about it. I don't think I'll be here when they get recovered, but hope not anyway. This is a slide I saw that I just wanted to make sure we got out there. It says, my grandpa served in Vietnam. As you can see, the big cloud over the children of Vietnam veterans today, the Agent Orange cloud. One thing, we went to Vietnam and we fought the war, and little did we know that by doing our part for what our country asked us to do, that our children and our grandchildren may be suffering the residuals from what we did honorably and so forth. So, the contaminated TCD is not easily or quickly broken down in the soil, and is concerned that herbicides residues might inhibit the growth of crops and other plants. These byproducts, which can be toxic, could then be passed to humans through the food chain. Did you ever thought about the reason to quit using DDT and so forth? Because we were getting it in our food. This is a picture of a young man, of a gentleman who is a Vietnam vet and his son, and it says, the heartaches the face of Vietnam veteran Al Martinelli with his son Christopher, underscoring the U.S. States government's tragic abandonment of Vietnam veterans' children. See, the government says that they think that it's causing problems with our children, but they can't recognize it because they don't have the money to fund anything to take care of it if they did. And you can see the bottom picture there, it's hands that were skin diseases that come out of Agent Orange exposure and so forth. So we were told, don't worry, it's not toxic to people. In fact, a lot of us took barrels of Agent Orange barrels once we emptied and cut them in two and made barbecue pits out of them so we could cook or even washed in them and so forth. We didn't know it could kill us later. We never in our wildest dreams ever thought it could affect our children and our grandchildren. After all, they were not in the Vietnam War. They never went to Vietnam. They don't even know what a Vietnam is right at the moment. It wasn't just Agent Orange. As you can see there, the barrels with the different color strikes on it, it's kind of like we just talked about the gift that keeps on giving. Agent Orange, Agent Pink, Agent Green, Agent Purple, Agent White, Agent Blue. Now, as we go through Agent Orange, you can see there one of the stickers that, bumper stickers I see from time to time, Agent Orange. If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. If you're not outraged out there in the world, in the United States and all across the world about the situation in Vietnam, as well as the situation here in the United States with the children of Vietnam and being born with deformities and the crops and so forth, as well as the children and grandchildren of Vietnam veterans, then you're not paying attention because it's a definite problem out there. The same people who sprayed Agent Orange on Vietnam are spraying your produce. Now, I want you to think about that one for a little bit. When next time you go to the grocery store, the same people who sprayed Agent Orange on Vietnam are spraying your produce. Maybe you ought to do a little bit of investigating. There's another one in the bottom left-hand corner. You can see a soldier holding up a barrel, and it says Agent Orange, the gift that keeps on giving. And if you'd like to have more information on Agent Orange and what it has done, what it is doing, Vietnam Veterans of America has a website you see there in the middle, Agent Orange Education Campaign. It's got some fantastic information on it. I highly suggest that you go in to that Agent Orange Vietnam Veterans website, pull up information about Agent Orange. If you're a veteran and you are having problems you think might be from Agent Orange, be sure and go to the website to talk about benefits. Even if you have children that you think are being affected by Agent Orange, even though the government is not recognizing it today, there's information on there about going ahead and putting them on the register. Because once the Vietnam veteran dies out, and we're dying quick, who's going to get out there and keep beating the drums for our children and our grandchildren be taken care of. They don't deserve something they had nothing to do with. And we're going to be dead and gone, and we ain't going to be able to stand up and say, I brought it home with me. Let's fix it. So, but there is a form you can fill out to make sure that they're on the register. I think one of these days, maybe they're going to recognize it, but see, they got this other problem. The United States is in another war, and they got a problem with burn pits. The burn pits of our war today are kind of like our Agent Orange of Vietnam. So now they're having to figure out how to take care of the soldiers of today who are coming down with the cancers and other problems caused by the burn pits. The United States has been in a war almost 92% of its existence. You go back and look at history and look at the United States in war. We are basically a warring nation. So whether they ever get around to have enough money to fund to take care of our children, our grandchildren, is yet to be seen because of ongoing war with the burn pits and so forth. But it's out there. Find out more information about it, and let us hear from you sometime on what your thoughts are and what can be done. Now, let's talk about another situation in Vietnam that we left over there, another gift that keeps on giving. Unexploded bombs, landmines, and grenades and claymores. Now, as you can see in the bottom right-hand picture there, that's some of the old mines, rusted mines and shells and so forth that have been left over non-exploded, unexploded ordnance, because it's not all mines. It's shells coming from ships. It's shells coming from airplanes, helicopters, and they'll always explode. The left picture there is some of the unexploded ordnance that are actually, that picture is at the entrance to the to Quezon today. That is the park they have trying to start for tourists there at Quezon, and that's some of the shells still sitting around there. The Vietnamese people are don't waste nothing. They use a lot of these unexploded shells out there for landscaping things around their gardens and so forth, and which is creating a real problem for them. And but they do a lot of scrap metal searching even today, and unfortunately with less than ideal conditions for them. Okay. Bombs away. There were more bombs dropped on Vietnam. In fact, one area of Vietnam, South Vietnam, along the Quang Tri Province, than had ever been dropped anywhere during the warfare. It was dropped by the bombers that you see like that. It was also dropped by the smaller jets and non-jet airplanes and so forth. But as you can see, the bombs coming out, the bombs away there, was a thing called Arclight, where they dropped these huge bombs just like that, and it would light up the sky and light up everything else, and it would just it would really be interesting to see from a long distance. No, you don't want to be up close. This kind of give you an idea of the landscaping after after bombing run. Since 1975, more than 40,000 Vietnamese are believed to have been killed, and about 60,000 others maimed by what is known as unexploded ordnance, landmines, artillery shells, cluster bombs, and the like that failed to detonate decades ago. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary or commemorating, not celebrating, the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War, and there's still stuff out there that's blowing up and killing their children and the people of South Vietnam. Unexploded yet active remains of the Vietnam War now lie in wait for incautious scrap metal scavengers or for unsuspecting children at play, especially the cluster bombs. Children see those and, boy, let me get that and play with it, and we'll play ball with it or whatever. But that kind of gives you an idea of the terrain after probably an Arclight bombing and so forth with all the you don't see that too much now in the South, but you will see it up in the North and also around the DMC. Because down in the South, they have reclaimed most of the land for rice paddies and other stuff. So you don't see as many bomb craters unless you get out into the jungles and so forth. What is the Unexploded Ordinance? UXO. As defined by the UN Mine Action Service, UXO is an explosive munition such as mortars, artillery shells, grenades, and mines that have been primed, fused, or otherwise prepared for use or used. In other words, they probably could be dropped out of an airplane. They could just been in storage. They could have been fired, dropped, launched, thrown, or projected through, yet remain unexploded, either through malfunction or design or for other causes. Some of the bombs were on timers, so they were not supposed to go off until they got so far from the ground. And sometimes those timers either didn't go off or got damaged and didn't go off when it was supposed to. So just sitting there waiting for the right time to go off. As you can see, the kids sitting on that bomb, I guess somewhat they get used to it. And we don't know whether that one has been defused or what, and they don't. So what is a cluster munition? This is the one that's causing a lot of problems. One of our shows recently, we talked about Colonel Hamilton, Bat 21. When he was on the ground, they were trying to rescue him. To keep the Viet Cong away from him, they dropped cluster bombs all around him so they couldn't get to him. And a lot of them are still there. As you can see there, up in the right-hand picture, it's a regular bomb, but inside that bomb are all those softball-size explosives. Cluster munitions are some of the most hazardous unexploded ordnance, especially around Quang Tri Province. They are still typically released from a clamshell-like container that disperses hundreds of small bomblets. These bomblets are designed to detonate after a specific number of rotations. And I see a misspelled word there. Forgive me for that. Sometimes my fingers hit more than my mind and brain wants me to do. Have a high failure rate at 30% in Vietnam of going off. In other words, 30% of all the cluster bombs that went off in Vietnam are still there, which means they leave large areas of land contaminated by unexploded ordnance. Okay. Again, that is actually a display at the Mine Center in Dong Ha in Quang Tri Province there in Vietnam. I took the picture when I was there. Cluster munitions are particularly dangerous for children who often mistake them for toys because they are brightly covered in the size and shape of a baseball or softball. You see a young man there is having his orange bandage, and you see a young man there in the wheelchair with both legs gone and so forth. So, unexploded ordnance from far back as the American Civil War still pose a hazard. Unexploded ordnance is not new to Vietnam. Unexploded ordnance worldwide, both in current and former combat areas, military ranges pose a hazard. In North Carolina, they recently, about 10 years ago, they were building a new area in Marshville, North Carolina, a new school to be exact, and they came across a unexploded Civil War bomb. Camp Butner here in North Carolina, which is not too far from us, around Butner, North Carolina, they have a subdivision out there. And since it used to be a military training area, they're finding a lot of going out and digging for their roses and finding unexploded ordnance out there. So they've had the guys come in from Fort Bragg to find and look for most of them. And they probably got most of them out, but it goes right on. The big problem with unexploded munitions is that over the years, the detonators and main charges deteriorate, making them more sensitive to any disturbance, making them very dangerous to handle. Quang Tri Province, along the border of DMZ, that's the demilitarized zone, North and South Vietnam, and along the borders of Laos, is said to be the heaviest bombed area in the history of war. If you see the picture there, you see where North Vietnam is, the DMZ or demarcation line, Quang Tri Province, and you see Quang Tri City there, and you see where Laos is right along the border there. After the war, Quang Tri Province alone has sustained over 8,500 casualties from accidents involving unexploded ordnance, and 31% of the victims have been children. Over 18,000 square acres of land have been mapped out as confirmed hazardous areas. Dung Ba Dinh, 10, With the unexploded bomb he found while tending his family of water buffaloes in Quang Tri Province. There it is, laying on top of the ground. You can see it in the left-hand corner, and he just taking care of his water buffalo. And there is one that probably got washed up during the monsoons and so forth. 6 killed in Vietnam when unexploded U.S. shells goes off. Now, this is some of the news reports I have pulled up from over there. As you can see, the man right there has got a bomb in his hand, and he's got a hammer trying to open it up so that he can get the blasting stuff out so he can sell it as scrap metal. Not the most intelligent thing to do. 6 Vietnamese civilians, 3 adults, and 3 children were killed when an American artillery shell fired during the Vietnam War exploded. The Vietnamese state media report that the explosion detonated when the villagers cut the shell open to salvage the metal casing. That was one of the stories. The ordnance is a 105 Howitzer Shell discovered by farmers in the Ta Long, a village in Quang Hoa Province in southern Vietnam. Ta Long is less than 40 miles from Nha Trang Air Base, used by the U.S. Air Force Special Forces during the Vietnam War. And you can see where someone even autographed it. Hey, Charlie. And now this shell came from a ship, which means it's probably about the size of a car. Officers from the United Kingdom-based Mines Advisory Group, MAG, defused a giant Vietnam War air shell unearthed from a garden in the central province of Quang Tri Province. Well, how'd you like to find that in your garden? The Naval Gun Shell HC Mike 13, weighing 1,900 pounds, had been found buried in the Cassavay Garden near a house of a family in Jilin District, about 100 meters away from the National Railroad. I mean, that would have taken most of the village with it. The family was leveling the garden. You see a guy with a shovel there leveling out some land. When they hit the shell about 1 meter underground. It's about 1.3 meters in length and 0.4 meters in diameter. Officers from the MAG arrived and transported it to another location for diffusion. They couldn't diffuse it there because it would do a lot of damage. So even though they didn't know what was going to happen, these guys loaded it up and took it back to where they used. Local authorities said it was the biggest shell ever detected in the province. Just out taking care of your garden. Now, here's a family sitting there having dinner, and look, there's an unexploded shell laying there in their yard. You can see 2 children standing beside some more decorations. Even there's a nice restaurant right there with some unexploded shells sitting out front to attract tourists, I guess. And there's a scrap metal person selling scrap metal and waiting for scrap metal, and it looks like the lady is getting ready to beat on it a little bit. I guess that's the way you find out whether it's going to explode or not, is beat on it. But you can see they're everywhere, and they used it for everything over there for the scrap metal people. Unexploded ordnance can be found anywhere, like a rice paddy. Now, there's a gentleman pretending to taking care of his rice. One hand is badly maimed, and he doesn't even have an arm on the other. Unexploded ordnance can be a life-changing event. If you're out there taking care of your rice and so forth, and you step on one of the landmines or a bomb that hadn't been, or especially those cluster bombs, and you're out there because you're standing in the rice and standing in water, and you can't see them. That's a rice paddy explosion. That's where they found the bomb in a rice paddy that, and I'm not certain from the picture whether that blew up with someone or they just set it off to get it, but that's a rice paddy with where one of the unexploded ordnance was found and set off. Collecting scrap metal from the war is an important means to survive in a communist Vietnam. They do the people of Vietnam today, just like they did when we were there during the war, do anything they can to survive under the communist system, especially now. So you see a young boy out there with a metal detector, and you see a young man with a basket there where they go out collecting metal parts from bullets to unexploded shells, trying to make a little extra money to help feed the family. The air and ground wars. You can see some weapons used in the Vietnam War, landmines can be used. And all the ordnance we talked about, folks, is not necessarily the American ordnance. The North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong all set out landmines and so forth. Unexploded ordnance are not just bombs, they're not all from the American military. The communists also added to the unexploded ordnance problems. As you can see the landmines there, they had the thing called bouncing betties. Once you stepped on it, when you walked on over it, it would bounce up about 2 feet high and explode for the guy behind you. Some of the mines and so forth there. But the butterfly cluster bomb, you see in the middle picture there, that's actually a picture I took one day out. The picture on the left is that same kind of bomb after about 50 years. It looks like there's an old bicycle chain or something behind it there. And you can see how it was used even during the war. They would take that unexploded bomb and rig it up to a tree and branches like that so it would still go off. And even though it had been dropped and it was no longer good, the Americans might think, but the Viet Cong would take it and use it like that for a bomb. Butterfly cluster bombs made into a booby trap by the communists still waiting for someone to come along. That trap may still be sitting right there just like that for some unsuspecting child hurting their water buffalo to walk by. Grenades. Grenades are still a problem over there, and bullets. As you can see that in the picture, a cartridge trap. They used these during the Vietnam War. The Viet Cong would sometimes find an unexploded or unshot shell, dig a hole and put it down in there with a nail, and an unsuspecting soldier or South Vietnamese civilian would step on that, the foot would go down in the hole and the shell would go off. And they're still around today. A grenade between two cans and a string, simple, non-discriminatory, but deadly. The Viet Cong used to put those up on the trail. And if you got South Vietnamese family walking through and so forth, they wouldn't necessarily see the monofilament line either. So they got, and this possibility they're still out there because today the line's probably rotted, but if you bump that can and the grenade falls out, it can be just as deadly 50 years away from when it was first done. So. Also, we got creative, the American soldiers. I put this in just kind of loosen things up a little bit. We also dropped some interesting autograph. There's somebody getting ready to drop a commode on the Viet Cong. I guess they kind of want to give their attitude and what their opinion was. And there's one someplace that I could not find the picture that was somebody from Raleigh, North Carolina was dropping one, and it was greetings from Raleigh. And there's one that says, let's see. It's not the gift that counts, it's the thought. So they were dropping that bomb on them. And the guys that loaded the planes sometimes got very creative, but I can imagine when they dropped the commode on somebody that the thoughts of the communists when that commode hit the ground. I would imagine it probably busted all to pieces, but maybe it was in a rice paddy and it didn't burst and so forth. But I'd like to have been, no, I wouldn't. Okay. After the fall of South Vietnam, the communists of North Vietnam created what they call re-education camps. What there were was slave labor camps where former South Vietnamese military, government officials, teachers, those who worked for the Americans, as well as some of the former Viet Cong. See, not only did they put the South Vietnamese soldiers in, they put the people who worked for the Americans, they put the teachers, they put anybody with basically with a college education in, and they also put the Viet Cong in. The reason being, most of the Viet Cong were nationalists. The communist North Vietnam didn't have time to fool with the nationalists. The nationalists was people who wanted one Vietnam, but they didn't necessarily want it communist. So in order to get them thinking right, they also took a lot of those former Viet Cong nationalists and sent them to the re-education camps. Quite often, these people were given a stick and sent out and going, there's landmines out there, the unexploded bombs out there. Take this stick and go find them. And when you find them, take this stick and take the explosives out of them, make them so they're safe. Which is, in other words, you go out there with a stick and stop it in the ground, and if it blows up, then you found it. That's how many were killed or badly injured with no medical care. This is from a story of, in fact, if you remember back a show I did not too long ago about, I thought of him yesterday, Rescorder, who was a hero at Idrang Valley, but he was also the man who saved about 2,700 people at the 9/11 at the towers when it fell. He had taught them to get out of the tower. But there was another guy in that same story in that show. His name was Ripley, and I mentioned a Marine captain, a South Vietnamese Marine captain who had 700 Marines, and there were 30,000 North Vietnamese military coming down across the Dong Ha Bridge, 600 tanks. That Marine told them that he would stay there as long as it took. Of the 700 Marines, the 700 Marines that were there, 53 of them survived. And in that picture, that man right there in the picture is the young Marine Special Force, young Marine leader, the captain. That's his picture in Reeducation camp. There's a great movie out about him and Ripley, but I just threw that in and say a little bit out there. So now, only in Vietnam could you take a rat, because they're big enough in Vietnam, tie a string on them and put them on a spring and pull a line across, and they walk back and forwards on the land to set off the landmines. You see that green landmine right there, and the idea is to take a Vietnamese rat, and that's how they use them to clear up some of the landmines of data above ground. Like I said, the Vietnamese people are very ingenious, and only in Vietnam, I believe, a rat's big enough to set them off, because they are big. You can see a landmine down in the right-hand picture that's hidden, very easy for a person to step on. But I love the picture with the rats, and they got them strung up, going back and forth, so you can see the spring, the rat goes, and that's how to keep where they're going, and they're kind of mapped out. So you go with this area, and then they move the rat to another line and back and forwards and setting off the landmines. I think that's ingenious. Now, this is the Mine Action Visitor Center. If you get a chance to go to Vietnam and you're around Dong Ha, be sure and go to this place. It's quite interesting. The young man that runs it there is very knowledgeable. Many countries and organizations have recognized the dangers of the Vietnamese people and to their children, and have funded groups to assist in finding and diffusing these unexploded ordnance. The Netherlands has a big group going in there, but before the government really got involved, these people at the Mine Action Center there at Quang Tri Province, it says Vietnam, which is actually right outside of Dong Ha. Quang Tri Province is it's kind of like the state. But now the government's getting more involved, and they're going back in and doing some great things to help find us. But originally, these guys had to go out and look the best they could, or a family would call them and say, "We found this unexploded ordnance, we found this ordnance," or whatever, and they'd have to go out and so forth. So they have done a fantastic job, and we'll talk a little bit about them as we go. This is inside the Mine Action Center. This is kind of their centerpiece. You can see some of the bombs and so forth, some of the displays. They got a lot of displays and so forth that are very interesting in there. And there's some of the unexploded ordnance. They do a lot of classes there. They take a lot of school children and bring them there and give them classes on what to look for and what to mess with and not to mess with and so forth. But that's some of the classes they have, and that's some of the unexploded ordnance they have there. As you can see, that I have a feeling that big one right there may be the one that came from the ship, because I think there's too many more like that. As you can see there, the prosthetics and so forth. The former South Vietnamese soldier, if he lost a leg, an arm, or so forth, so what? The communists today do nothing for them. In fact, about the only chance they get to get a prosthetic arm or leg is somebody from outside of Vietnam. They're bringing it into them. But you can see there some of the prosthetic devices they have used and developed and so forth for the Mine Action Center. Danger mines, there's a class where they're teaching on, and look for the signs like that, telling them to be sure to go in that area. But as a class, you can see how neat they are, all dressed in their uniforms and so forth. And whenever you walk in, we were amazed when we walk into a classroom. They stand up and clap when you come in. It's they treat you really special. The Landmine Center of Quang Tri, manager at Mine Action Center. After years, there have been now a ray of hope of how to bring this issue to real closure. We believe that by placing priority on education, victim assistance, and surveying and cleanup efforts, unexploded ordnance and problems can be managed in a cost-efficient and time-bound manner. And that's the logo of the Mine Action Center. Regards, Fu, and that's the manager. You can actually go online and get information and send him an email and talk to him and so forth. Integrated survey and clearance project implemented by Norwegian People's Aid, Project Renew, NPA Renew, and Mine Advisory Group, MAG, with the aim of releasing safe land for the community. They have come up with a pretty good idea out there on what they're doing and finding and so forth. Deaths and injuries related to unexploded ordnance in Quang Tri province from 2000 to 2016. Now, we left there, the war ended in 1975. Okay, so for 25 years, that we're starting there. As you can see there, the red is the fatalities and the green are the injuries, and it is getting better. We were almost at 60 a month there, and we're getting down now, so you can see it is getting better with the process. Quang Tri town, or Quang Tri city, what I was called it there, Quang Tri province, 15 June 2018, local workers who were building a guest house in the old citadel unexpectedly uncovered a cache of dangerous wartime munitions and some soldiers' remains. The site manager reported the shocking discovery to the military, who called NPA Renew to help deal with unexploded ordnance. And that was June 15th of this year. They were digging and excavating for a new building, and they found a large unexploded group of unexploded ordnance and some former soldiers' remains. Didn't say whether it was North or South or Americans or whatever. Just remains. NPA Renew teams have started working in the Kavat village since 11 June 2018 with the aim of identifying and mapping out the exact extent of unexploded ordnances, contamination, or confirmed hazardous areas that need full clearance, and at the same time demolishing any munition. Excuse me, my mind and my brain aren't working at that. Local villagers, for the past 3 weeks, they have surveyed nearly 900,000 square meters, located and safely destroyed 145 items of unexploded ordnance, including 135 cluster munitions during the process. As you can see there, they've got landmines out, they've got survey instruments out. What they're doing is they're taking an area like that, they're staking it out and methodically going through it and keeping it with the surveys and so forth. And what they do is when they get through the process, they're going, okay, this land is clear. Hopefully it's not a couple of feet deep one of these days when the monsoons come along, it pops up, because right now they're saying it's clear. Early on Wednesday, 25th of July, 2018. We're not talking about a long time ago now, folks. Early on Wednesday, 25th of July, 2018, local authority of Vinh Thu Commune, Vinh Linh District, stopped a local man who lives in the Thubai Ha village from trying to transport a bomb for sale. Some neighbors spotted the man's reckless action, so they immediately reported to police. The Vinh Linh District Military Command called Quang Tri Province or Quang Tri Legacy of War Coordinator Center and asked for support. And what they did is they came in and exploded it, which it's probably saved the village as well as the man who was transporting it to somewhere where he could beat on a little bit and sell it. This is the man. Vinh Lin Quang Tri, January 4th, 2018. Responding to an emergency call from the Vinh Toc Commune authorities, a mobile EOD team of Renew and NPA today safely removed a U.S. naval shell and transported it to the demolition site for safest destruction. Earlier, 70-year-old fisherman Hunak Sum found the shell on the beach and immediately reported his discovery to the authority. And that's his picture. You can see he hasn't had a lot of dental work. He's probably been chewing a little bit of betel nut. And but that's a South Vietnamese fisherman today. Danger mines, danger poison. Today, members of the American military as well as the Vietnamese military, former South Vietnamese military, receive no support from the communists, suffer today from the effects of defoliants, tropical diseases, parasites, and other maladies. The Vietnamese people also being affected by defoliants along with unexploded ordnance today. So they're out there. We came home. We left a legacy there. We brought home our own legacy with the unexploded ordnance and so forth out there. And most of us don't even know about it. One of my shows coming up is going to be, most of us did not realize there was another war going on. While we were at war in Vietnam, there was another war going on in Laos, just as deadly as in Vietnam. But see, the American soldier wasn't supposed to be in Laos. So there was a whole new group of soldiers and participants in Laos so that nobody would know about it. But it was going on. And the people who are fighting for the United States over there paid a terrible price too. But that's the information out there. Hope you do some more research on your own. Like I said, you can go online to the Mine Action Center. He is very good to email you back and forth or get you information. If you need more information about Agent Orange and the defoliants, go to the Vietnam Veterans of America website and get some great information there. If you have questions, I will try to answer them for you if you next show or whatever. Again, I want to thank you for watching our show tonight. It means a whole lot to us that you're continuing watching it. It makes us try harder to give you an entertaining and educational show. If you have a friend who didn't see the show, you think might want to see the show, or you'd like to see it again, just go to Nissan Communications and click on demand and find the show and watch it again. Or tell your friends to get out there and do it. It's www.nissancommunications.com live. Nissan is like the car. If you go back to remember the slide we had up at the first, but go on and like I said, while you're there, go to see some of his old shows. If you like the show, let me know. If you didn't like the show, let me know. If you like the show, tell all your friends about it. Don't tell them that you didn't like it. Tell them you either liked it, or if you didn't like it, again, let me know, because I want to make it, everybody likes it out there. I appreciate all of y'all. The viewership is growing. Our next show will be starting at 8 o'clock Eastern time from Raleigh, North Carolina. And it will be the 26th of September. And it will be on the Medal of Honor, Vietnam. We're going to be talking about some of the Medal of Honor winners of Vietnam. One show is not enough to get all of them, but we're going to get some of them, then we'll do another show later. But certainly tune in and see about the Medal of Honor. Now, this goes out, this show goes out all over everywhere. But as you may know, we are here in North Carolina, especially a coast. Got a lot of good friends down at the coast. We're having problems with this little thing called a hurricane, Hurricane Florence. It keeps moving around and so forth. Here in Raleigh, we're not expecting a whole lot of problems other than a great deal of rain and flooding and so forth. Probably we won't get a whole lot of wind, But wherever you are out there, if you're in the Florence area, not the Florence area, because there's Florence, South Carolina, which you may also read. If you're in the area that's affected by the hurricane, either by the winds, storm surge, or the flooding and so forth, take care of your family, take care of yourself. Listen, they said today on one of the bridges at Southport, North Carolina, which is right on the South Carolina line, at 8 o'clock tonight, they were closing the bridge so there was nobody going in or out. In other words, if you're there, you're there. And you get yourself in problems and you call for help, there ain't nobody there to help you. So you might get up on your roof or whatever you want to do, but you're going to get wet, you may get blown off, you're going to get very hungry, you may get very thirsty. So heed the warnings and go to the shelters or leave town, or whatever it takes, but take care of yourself and your family. And if you're out there and you're not in harm's way, think about it and say a prayer for all those that are out there, because everybody is important. Everybody's got someone looking at them who very well be looking at them as their heroes out there. So not much we can do about Florence. It has made a big change in the turn. It may keep right on turning going south and not affect us as much, because the difference from what was here in Raleigh and yesterday and what that we're going to talk about in Raleigh today is changed in itself. So as you're out there, please be careful. Reach out to a friend in need out there if there's someone and so forth. But again, I thank you for the viewing tonight, and looking forward to having you come back with us September 26th. I had to stop and look to see what the date was again, because I forget myself. But thank you and good night.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.